On the morning of August 6, 1945, at around 8:15 a.m. local time, a single B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay released a uranium-based fission bomb called Little Boy over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The weapon detonated 43 seconds later at an altitude of about 1,968 feet above the AIOI bridge, producing a blast equivalent to roughly 15 kilotons of TNT. In just a fraction of a second, the entire concept of strategic bombing changed. Until that morning, destroying a city required hundreds of aircraft and thousands of tons of explosives. Now, one plane carrying one bomb could do the same. By the summer of 1945, the Imperial Japanese Military Command had grown used to massive American bombing raids. Formations of more than 300 B-29s regularly attacked Japanese cities at night with incendiary bombs that burned whole districts to the ground. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th and 10th involved 279 aircraft dropping over 1,600 tons of bombs, killing an estimated 100,000 civilians and destroying 16 square miles of the city. Even though Japanese air defenses were collapsing, they could still track these huge formations on radar and sometimes attempt interception. Civilians had learned the pattern: air raid sirens, multiple contrails in the sky, warnings, and shelters. The Hiroshima mission broke that pattern completely. The 509th Composite Group, created and trained in isolation at Wendover Airfield in Utah, had prepared for a new kind of mission that ignored standard bombing doctrine. Instead of large formations providing mutual defensive fire, this one required only a few aircraft, a single bomber, 2 observation planes, and several weather reconnaissance aircraft sent ahead. Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, carried a crew of 12 and a single weapon weighing 9,700 pounds. The plane took off from Tinian at 2:45 a.m., followed by the Great Artiste, which carried measuring instruments and necessary evil, assigned to photograph the mission. Weather planes had already confirmed that skies over Hiroshima were clear. At 31,000 feet, these aircraft flew individually rather than in formation. Their small radar signatures drew no special attention from Japanese observers, who assumed they were on routine reconnaissance flights. The weapon itself represented the end result of the Manhattan Project, a research and industrial program that cost around $2 billion and employed more than 130,000 people across multiple secret sites. Little Boy used a gun-type design so reliable it was never tested before combat. A uranium-235 projectile was fired down a barrel into another uranium target, creating a supercritical mass and triggering a chain reaction. The bomb contained 64 kilograms of enriched uranium. Only about 1% of that mass underwent fission, but it was enough to unleash a level of energy beyond anything humanity had ever witnessed. The uranium had been separated from uranium-238 through a massive industrial effort at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, an engineering scale the Axis powers never came close to matching. At 8:15 a.m., Major Thomas Farabee released Little Boy from 31,000 feet above Hiroshima. 43 seconds later, it exploded. Within fractions of a second, a fireball millions of degrees hot expanded above the city. A blinding flash of light ignited everything flammable within a mile. Human shadows burned into stone. Skin caught fire miles away. The blast wave crushed buildings and threw debris across the city. 70,000 to 80,000 people died instantly. Many more suffered burns, trauma, and lethal doses of radiation. Traditional bombing destroyed through fire and blast over hours. Nuclear detonation did it in seconds. Radiation added a new, invisible kind of death. Victims who survived the first moments soon succumbed to radiation sickness, nausea, internal bleeding, organ failure. By the end of 1945, around 140,000 people were dead. Those who lived, the hibakusha, carried the scars and illnesses for decades. They suffered high rates of leukemia and other cancers, proof of a weapon whose destruction continued long after the explosion ended. The destruction of Hiroshima followed patterns that engineers could predict from the bomb's yield and altitude, but the scale was unlike anything ever seen. All the effects of a massive air raid were compressed into a single instant. The detonation completely destroyed about 4.7 square miles of the city. Nearly 70% of all buildings vanished, and another 7% were heavily damaged. In the hours that followed, a firestorm swept across the ruins. It devoured what remained, though its shape was different from those caused by incendiary raids. The initial blast had broken the continuity of fuel, leaving isolated pockets of fire. One building near the hypocenter, the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, survived partially because of its reinforced concrete and the almost vertical angle of the blast. Today it stands as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, a reminder of what the explosion did to everything else around it. At first, Japanese authorities could not understand what had happened. Communication from Hiroshima stopped instantly, but that alone did not explain the cause. Reports trickled in. Soldiers saw a brilliant flash. Others described a mushroom-shaped cloud, but no one could form a complete picture. Radio silence from an entire city was something that had never occurred before. Tokyo's military command assumed another massive air raid, but when reconnaissance aircraft arrived, the destruction made no sense. It was circular, concentrated around one point, unlike any conventional bombing. Only after President Truman's public announcement 16 hours later did the truth become clear. Japan had been struck by a weapon based on the power of the atom. The psychological shock was immense. Japanese doctrine had always emphasized courage and sacrifice, the belief that willpower could overcome material disadvantage. But this new weapon ignored all of that. No amount of bravery could stop something that erased an entire city in a single moment. Defense itself had become meaningless. The United States had already demonstrated overwhelming industrial power through its conventional bombing campaign. Yet even with total air superiority, destroying Japan's industry had required months of operations, thousands of sorties, and heavy losses. The atomic bomb ended those limits. Now, one aircraft could do in seconds what once demanded entire fleets. Japanese leaders could not know how many bombs the Americans possessed. In reality, there were only 2 ready for combat in August 1945, with a third corps nearly complete. But uncertainty was enough. If the Americans could produce even one every few weeks, Japan could not defend itself or rebuild. The logic of resistance collapsed completely. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war and invaded Manchuria. Within days, Japanese positions were falling everywhere. But it was the atomic attacks that gave Emperor Hirohito the reason he needed to overrule his generals. During meetings on August 9th and 10th, after the bombing of Nagasaki, he told his ministers that continuing the war was impossible. 5 days later, in his imperial rescript announcing Japan's surrender, he spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, whose power to destroy was incalculable. The phrase provided a way for Japan's leaders to accept defeat without dishonor. They were not surrendering to men, but to science itself. Without those bombings, the argument for peace might have failed. As the world studied what had happened, deeper lessons began to emerge. Nuclear weapons redefined strategy. They offered decisive power without the need for massed armies or defensive balance. No wall, no shelter, and no anti-aircraft gun could stop them. Civil defense was useless when heat, blast, and radiation struck all at once across miles. The new weapons also revealed an industrial truth. Only nations with vast scientific resources could build them. This created a hierarchy of power that would shape the second half of the 20th century. After the war, diplomats tried to prevent a nuclear arms race. The Baruch Plan of 1946 proposed international control of atomic energy. If failed, the United States demanded full inspection rights, while the Soviet Union refused any outside monitoring. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first bomb. The nuclear monopoly was over. The United Kingdom followed in 1952, France in 1960, and China in 1964. Each new detonation proved that nations with the right knowledge and industry could unlock the atom. Proliferation was slower than many feared, not because of treaties, but because the science itself was so demanding. As nuclear weapons entered military arsenals, strategy itself had to evolve. New doctrines emerged: deterrence, massive retaliation, and finally, mutual assured destruction. The destructive power of these weapons made their use almost impossible to justify except in response to an existential threat. This created a paradox. Owning the weapons brought strategic advantage. Using them would bring global catastrophe. That paradox defined the nuclear age of the Cold War. Since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear weapons have never again been used in combat. Not because later wars were less intense, but because their very existence changed the logic of war. The Korean War, Middle East conflicts, and even the long struggle in Vietnam all unfolded without nuclear strikes, though the capability always existed. The events of August 1945 set a precedent that remained unique, a warning rather than a model. After 1945, the weapons themselves evolved rapidly. Thermonuclear bombs, using fusion rather than fission, achieved yields measured in megatons, not kilotons. The United States tested the first in 1952, the Soviet Union followed in 1953. Delivery systems advanced from bombers to intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched weapons. Warheads became smaller, lighter, and deadlier, capable of striking multiple targets at once. Yet, even as technology advanced, the fundamental principle stayed the same. A nuclear chain reaction released energy on a scale that no other explosive could match. Its effects could not be contained, replicated, or defended against. On August 6, 1945, the crew of the Enola Gay began a chain of events that reached far beyond the Pacific War. They demonstrated that science, industry, and strategy could merge to create weapons that redefined human conflict. Gunpowder had changed armies. Aircraft had changed the battlefield. Nuclear weapons changed the nature of decision-making itself. From that day forward, global leaders faced a new reality. Wars between nuclear powers could no longer be won, only prevented. The mushroom cloud over Hiroshima did not just mark Japan's defeat or America's victory. It marked the end of an old world and the beginning of another, a world where the ultimate weapon worked exactly as designed. The war ended and warfare itself changed forever.